Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar, which is going to be an introduction to aquaponics. So before beginning, I just want to make sure everything is working well. So if you can hear me, just give me a like. There is a chat in this webinar as well. So if you want to just leave me a comment to make sure that I can start the webinar with you, would be really good. Yeah, I think it's working. We got few viewers. So give me some like, guys, if you can hear me. So during this webinar, we're going to go through a lot of information. It's going to be only an hour. So I'm going to give you a bit of technical information as well. So you can take some notes. So if you want to take a notepad with you, a book, and a pen, a big glass of water, so you don't move for the whole hour. And then if you got any questions, in this webinar, I don't think we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar because we don't have time. So if you have any question, please put them in the comments of the video and I will respond to it later. So before starting the webinar, I would like to announce the two winners of the competition, to the one who shared the video. So we got Hedy Segond and we got Mark Spencer. So I'm going to contact you through Facebook probably, and I'm going to send you the solar air pump. So congratulations to you guys. So we're going to start the webinar now. I hope everyone can really hear me. So I'm going to put the slides on the screen. Okay, so I hope everyone can see the slides. I'm just checking something on the background. Yes, apparently you can see me. Sorry, it's just going to take a few seconds. Yes, it's working, so let's go. So it's just going to take a few seconds. So during this webinar, we're going to go through first why is aquaponics so important and why I believe so much into aquaponics. So I'm going to first give you, as an introduction, a current picture of the food industry, of what the society is doing right now. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. Then we're going to see what is aquaponics exactly, how it works, what are the main advantages of aquaponics. We're going to see what kind of fish and vegetables we can grow in aquaponics. We're going to see that it depends on a number of factors. And then I'm going to respond to a few common questions. And we're going to see, technically, where to start with aquaponics, how to start your own setup in the best conditions, and what is the best way to success. So a current view of the current food industry. So I'm going to have quite a negative view on this one, just my personal point of view, but I'm sure a lot of you are going to share this point of view. But I think it's very important to start there because aquaponics is really nice. It's really nice to grow fish in your backyard and to be able to grow some vegetables as well. You're going to be able to produce some super healthy food at home. It's super funny, but I think also it's very important. And here's the reason why. So in the current society we live in, all the food we buy from the supermarket is mostly produced in monoculture, which means that it's produced, basically the farmers are producing only one species. So just to be clear, if we take the example of corn, when you buy corn from the supermarket, The corn is grown in a field where there is only corn in the field, nothing else. So the farmers are killing all the other species. They see it as pests. I'm talking about insects, but also other plants. And you know that nature always wants to balance things. And in nature, you never see an ecosystem with only one species. It's always a balance between different species, and each species has a specific role. So what we are doing right now in our current society, we are fighting against nature instead of producing food with nature. So what happened in those fields? The farmer is killing everything. Is only using the soil as a the support for the roots, basically. But we don't work with nature, with the natural principles. And the farmer is only basically growing the corn from the fertilizer he adds into the field. Unfortunately, as humans, we don't know exactly what a plant needs to grow the best nutritional profile. So basically, we add some fertilizer in the field, but we don't really understand what is happening. So obviously, we know how to produce a crop that looks good and that makes a lot of volume, a lot of weight. But in terms of nutritional value, it's very poor. So I think the first problem of the current food industry is that we don't work with the natural principle. We want only grow one species per field, and it has a very negative impact on several factors. The first one is that we need a lot of fossil fuel, a lot of energy to fight against nature and to maintain a good structure in the soil. So just to give you a bit of information about this fact, you know, in a normal ecosystem, when you look at the soil is very light. There is a very light structure, and there is a lot of air able to enter into the soil. And the reason why, or I mean, how it happens, is the fact that in the soil there are a lot of living creatures, such as worms, insects, that are always working in the soil, and they mix all the components of the soil. They also transform the organic matter in different nutrients available for the plants. All this work is done free, you know, by nature. Every single insect has a specific mission in the soil, in the ecosystem. And when a farmer is killing all this biodiversity, basically then he has to do the work by himself. And that's what we are doing in normal agriculture, where we use big tractors, big machines to return the surface of the soil. It's a lot of work. It's huge in terms of energy, you know. And all this is a big loss when we could use only natural principles and live in nature doing what it's designed to do. Another big problem that I found in the current society is the fact that we eat some food that is coming from hundreds of kilometers away, even more sometimes. You know, just as an example, I live in Melbourne in Australia, and here we find some tomatoes that are coming from Europe. So you see, it's traveling thousands and thousands of kilometers before reaching our plate. So the problem of this is that when the food is transported, it generates, or it needs a lot of fossil fuel as well. You know, it generates a lot of pollution, and it has a very negative impact on the environment. Also, the farmers, when they grow the food in monoculture, they want to get rid of all the pests, because when you are in monoculture, you know, Mother Nature always try to balance the ecosystem. So when there is too much of one crop, you always got some predators that are coming to try to regulate the population. And that's exactly what happened in a field of corn. As soon as you put the corn in place in the field, if you don't put some pesticides in place, you have a lot of pests that are coming because they find some nice food in quantity. So the farmers already need to use pesticides or to use GMO. So it's again another problem. I'm not going to develop this one here. But yeah, another point, that is the fact that we are killing the biodiversity that we have in the world at the moment. And that's a big problem, I think. We are definitely reducing the biodiversity that is available around the world. And all this biodiversity is working for us normally, if we work with nature. Finally, I mean, when we transport the food for thousands and thousands of kilometers, The farmers are picking the food, the fruits or the crop that is not maturated yet. It's not ripe. So the food is basically maturated, so it's transported in fridge. And during the fridge transportation, it loses all the few nutrients that it had. So all the vitamins, a huge quantity of vitamins is lost during transport. So the food that we are eating in the supermarket is very poor in terms of vitamins, and also very poor in terms of taste. It's almost tasteless. So if you compare a tomato that you grow in your garden with a tomato from the shop, it's unbelievable that it's supposed to be the same fruit. You know, one is super tasty, the one from the garden is super tasty, very juicy, and the one from the shop is only water. So there is a big problem here, and I think now our society is eating a food that is very deficient in terms of nutrients. At such a point that the recent studies show that in some cities in the world, 50% of the population is consuming vitamins, you know, like under the form of pills, so added vitamins. And it really shows that we have a big problem in our food. And also it shows that the consumer is aware of this problem and is trying to fix the problem by eating pills, instead of trying to produce food in another way and produce food where it's consumed. So that's my view of the current food industry, and I'm sure a lot of you are gonna share this point of view. I think we need to find a new model where basically the food will be produced in a polyculture. We will produce some food that is high in terms of vitamins and very tasty. It's going to be produced where it's consumed, produced in total respect of the environment, so eco-friendly, natural, and that respects the biodiversity and improves the biodiversity. So that's the idea. That's basically what I'm trying to do in my place. What I try to help my customer to do, and that's basically the idea of permaculture and aquaponics. So now just another bracket that I'm going to open about the Eden Park. So you know, in the old text, if you look at the Bible or all the old texts, they talk about the Eden Park, and it was basically a fantastic area where humans had access to lovely food, very tasty food, without effort. And obviously in the text we read that this is gone because Evie ate the apple. I think actually it's probably still available for the one of us who grow food, or who approach the permaculture technique. So basically in permaculture, we are growing food in polyculture. Well, all the points that I just described before, they are here, but we can add 3 other components or 3 other points that are beauty, harmony, and love. And that's exactly what was in the Eden Park. And I think this is still completely available for anyone who takes the time to understand nature and work with nature. Instead of destroying things, just try to understand why sometimes you got pests in your garden, and how you can work with these animals instead of trying to always destroy them. So that's a bit the philosophy behind aquaponics and permaculture, and that's what I really believe in. And I think if we all produce a bit of food where we live, instead of importing it from the other side of the world, it's also going to have a very positive impact on the planet, and it's going to decrease all the pollution that is generated around food. So now I'm going to very shortly talk about myself, and then we go directly to the interesting part of this presentation, which is going to be aquaponics and the technical information. So if I want to define myself, I would say that I am a very passionate person about the aquatic environment. As a kid, I spent all my childhood diving, fishing all around the river. So I come from the eastern side of France, quite far from the sea, unfortunately, but very, very close to the mountains. And we have got a very big river there, which is called the Doubs. And I spent all my childhood there on the Doubs, really swimming, diving. Also, I spent a lot of time into the woods trying to understand the different interactions between the animals. Then I did my studies. I started my studies in landscaping. I had my first qualification in landscaping, and I specialized in ornamental ponds and vegetal biology. And then I continued my studies with a degree and a master degree in aquaculture and food science. So I've always been very, very passionate about the aquatic environment. I worked in different fish farms. When I talk about fish farms, I worked in freshwater fish farms, saltwater fish farms. I worked in shellfish, oyster, mussels, scallops, algae, lobster, a lot of different farms around the world. And I've always been quite frustrated by the way we were producing food, even in aquaculture, because it's exactly the same model, the same principle as I just described before. As a society, we are always trying to produce one species, and I think that's a big problem. So all the fish farms I used to work in, I was frustrated because instead of managing fish, because this is what I really wanted, to manage fish in an ecosystem, in a good environment, I was basically managing the disease that were living on the fish. So my job was basically to feed the fish and to spread some chemicals into the water to get rid of the fish. So yeah, you can imagine how upset I was doing this kind of things. And that's why at the moment I don't work directly in the field anymore, and I prefer to orient my career in aquaponics, because this is something I really believe in, and I think I can really make a difference. I can give you all my expertise in this field, so we can all produce a bit of food at home, food that is going to be healthy and sustainable. So that's my basically biggest frustration. In terms of achievement, I founded this company called Melbourne Aquaponics, where we offer private aquaponics setup for backyard. But I also offer a lot of courses about aquaponics trainings, and that's where I want to go now, is to basically spread the sustainable techniques that are permaculture and aquaponics around the world. Because I think instead of producing the setup by themselves, I'm doing a better job at teaching how to build your own aquaponic setup and how to maintain them. In this case, I can impact more people. And I think if everyone is working in this direction, we can really spread the technique around the world. And maybe in a few years, everyone is going to be able to produce a bit of food in his own backyard. And talking about that, you know where I come from in France. 20 years ago, when I grew up, we all had, like a lot of people in the village had their own garden and their own chicken coop. So we were already producing a bit of food, and now all this has been lost. I can't really explain why. I think it's a general society. People are a bit more busy and don't take time to work with nature, to be in contact with nature. So I think we lost a lot of things here, because obviously we lost a quality food, but we also lost the connection with nature. And that's really something that I believe is very important, and that my aim is to put this back in place, to bring nature back in the life of people, and to help them to produce some food that is going to be very high in terms of nutritional value. So now let's talk about the good stuff, about aquaponics. So first, aquaponics, the word aquaponics is very new. It's maybe a 15 or 20 years old word. But the technique by itself is very old. It's been used thousands of years ago by different in different countries, and mainly in Asia, in the paddy fields. So the paddy field is the area where the farmers are growing rice. So we can imagine that aquaponics have been created by some farmers who were finding they had a lot of pests on the rice. The rice is an aquatic plant that is growing in a very shallow water. So they thought, okay, we got some insects on the rice, why don't we put some predators there? So they put some fish into the paddy field. So if you look at the bottom right corner of this slide, you can see there is a picture of a fish. This fish is called tilapia. It's a very interesting species to grow in aquaponics because it's a very fast grower. It accepts very poor conditions of water, and the flesh is extremely good. The flesh is extremely good for for this type of fish, because that's a fish that can grow in poor conditions. The nutritional value are quite good as well, and this fish can breed by himself. I mean, it doesn't require a specific setup to breed it. So even if in a very small pond, it can still breed by itself. So it's very interesting to have this fish in aquaponics. So imagine when the farmers put this fish into the paddy field, the fish, the tilapia, started to eat all the pests that was growing on the rice. So the rice was growing a bit better. Then the fish obviously poo into the water, and the poo, so that's the principle of aquaponics, the poo is actually composed of ammonia. And this ammonia, thanks to some bacteria, is going to be transformed in nitrate, and then the nitrate are going to be transformed in nitrate by other bacteria. So basically we go from the fish poo to nitrate. And the nitrate is the food for the plant. You know, it's basically an exceptional nutrient for the plant. So the plants are growing from the nitrate, and therefore you got a cycle that is in place. And the farmer were finding at the end of the season, when they were harvesting the crop, they were finding that the rice was in perfect conditions because the fish was taking care of all the pests around. Also, the rice was growing way faster because he had some natural fertilizer into the water. And also, there was a double crop because they were able to harvest the tilapia. So this technique has been used for thousands of years in Asia. We also imagine that it's been used also in the Babylon gardens. You know, in the irrigation ponds, they were probably using some fish there to grow the fish, but also the fish was pouring into the irrigation channels. So then they used the water to water the crop. So it was a kind of aquaponics as well, even if the cycle was not completely closed. And yes, that's the story of aquaponics. So you see that it's definitely not something new. Now, when we talk about aquaponics nowadays, so the word comes from the combination of two techniques that are aquaculture and hydroponics. So aquaculture, obviously, is the production of fish, most of the time in very high density. And hydroponics is the production of vegetables. So most of the time we talk about a monoculture. So that's what we described at the beginning. That's why I'm very careful when I talk about hydroponics. I'm not so keen about it. It's the production of one crop in the use of a media. So basically, the crop is just growing from some fertilizers that the farmer is adding into the water. So let's have a look at those two techniques side by side. So in aquaculture, we work with very high density of fish. So we need to use, I mean, a lot of farms use pure oxygen because the fish is in such densities that we need to go in oversaturation in terms of oxygen into the water. So we use pure oxygen, and the use of pure oxygen necessitates the use of a special setup, and it consumes a lot of energy as well to produce the pure oxygen. So that's one of the points that is quite negative into the intensive aquaculture. Well, it's not always the case, and not all aquaculture use pure oxygen, but it's often the case in trout farms or those kind of farms where you got high density of fish. So in terms of input, we got some fish food, obviously. We use some water, and we use some pure oxygen. We also use some antibiotics because the fish are in such density that we need to use antibiotics to keep them alive and to get rid of all the disease. We also use a lot of pesticides because you got some disease on the fish, but you also got some parasites that are living on the surface of the fish. You got parasites that are living on the skin of the fish, in the gills, in the mouth. So basically, in aquaculture, we use different kinds of chemicals that we put into the water, and they are not going to kill the fish, but they are going to kill the parasites that are living on top of the fish. So that's all we need as input in aquaculture. In terms of output, we have obviously polluted water, because all those fish are going to poo into the water, and it's going to create a lot of ammonia. And unfortunately, when you got too much of it at once, it's going to generate of pollution into the river or into the sea, wherever you release the water. We're going to have some food and fish waste as well into the water, pesticides waste, and yeah, this is it. So that's basically the picture of aquaculture. You got a lot of input and a lot of output, whereas the aim is only to produce fish. Now let's have a look at what is hydroponics. So hydroponics is the production of vegetables with only the use of vegetable nutrients. We also use pesticides in hydroponics, because it's a big farms that are growing most of the time one species, so they need to use pesticides to regulate the population of pests. Also disease treatment, because you can have some disease such as on the fish. And then you got some organic waste in terms of output, and you got some pesticide waste, and this is treatment waste. So that's it for hydroponics. Now let's have a look at what is aquaponics. So aquaponics is really a closed ecosystem where we grow the fish and the vegetables all together. So here we don't use any pesticides or antibiotics, because if we use any of those, the problem is it's going to have a negative impact on the bacteria population. It's going to kill the bacteria that we got in the system. And the bacteria in aquaponics, they are basically doing the magic of transforming the fish poo into plant fertilizer. So basically, we never use any pesticide or antibiotics in aquaponics. So all the food we produce is 100% natural. So the aquaponics setup is composed of different parts. So here you got a picture of an EcoFlex setup that we produce at Melbourne Aquaponics, and you can see that it's composed of, you see a bench. So the bench, you can lift the bench, and underneath, oh, it looks like we got a technical problem, so I'm just gonna relaunch. Sorry, we had a technical problem, so I'm gonna relaunch Sorry, it's going to take me a few seconds. I really apologize for that. Okay, I'm going to put the slide in the screen again. I really apologize. Okay. Let's go back to aquaponics. So in aquaponics, we got a setup that is composed of a bench. The bench, inside the bench, if you leave the bench, you got some fish that are living into the fish tank. There is a fish tank here. On the top of this bench, you got a grow bed. So on the grow bed, there are some vegetables that are growing. And basically in the grow bed, you got a population of bacteria. So you got really three main parts. You got some fish, bacteria, and vegetables that are living all together. So they are all here for a specific purpose, is to create a whole ecosystem based on the nitrogen cycle, which is basically the cycle of life. So if we look at this sketch here, you can see that you got some fish pellets that you send into a fish tank. So when we talk about fish pellets, it's basically some fish food. We feed our fish. The water from the fish are releasing some ammonia into the water when they poo and they pee into the water. This ammonia is going to be transformed by some bacteria into nitrate. and then other kind of bacteria are going to transform it into nitrate. And then the nitrate is a source of food for the plant. So the plants are going to use this nitrate, and therefore they're going to purify the water. Then the water is going back into the fish, and you can see that it's doing a kind of cycle here where the water is always staying inside the system. So we don't use any water, only a bit by evaporation, but we don't lose anything into the soil. So that's really the principle of aquaponics is here in front of your eyes. That's what we call the cycle of life, or the nitrogen cycle. That's the magic of aquaponics. So now if we go back to our input and output, so here I added all the input of the aquaculture and the hydroponics and all the output of the aquaculture and hydroponics. So we would expect that obviously we're going to produce vegetables and fish, so we would expect that we would have the same input and output as we have in aquaculture and hydroponics. Actually, it's not the case. In terms of input, we don't use any pesticide, antibiotics, or disease treatment because in aquaponics we work with a big biodiversity, and nature is is balancing all the population, so we don't need to use all those pesticides. Also, we don't need to use pure oxygen because we work with a very low density of fish, so we don't use pure oxygen. Then in terms of water, we work with water, but the water stays into the system, so we don't consume water. Actually, we consume a very few liters of water that are due to the evaporation, and also when your vegetables are growing, they are composed of water as well. 70–80% of vegetables are composed of water, basically. So when you harvest your vegetables and your fish, you remove some water from the system. So vegetable nutrients, we don't use any because actually everything comes from the fish poo, so it's recycled. So the only input we really have in aquaponics is actually the fish food. In terms of output, so we don't use any pesticides, or we don't have any pesticide waste. We don't have fish waste because the fish waste is used into the system and is recycled to produce the vegetables nutrients. We don't have polluted water because, again, the water stays into the system and you don't have pollution. What could be seen as a fish waste is actually used as a nutrient for the plant. So we remove that. The pesticides as well, disease treatment, we don't use any. So the reality is in aquaponics, we use only fish food to produce vegetables and fish. And we don't have any pollution that is created. So that's really the magic of working with nature and not against nature. So now a few other benefits of aquaponics. There is no weeding in aquaponics because we use raised beds, so the seeds of the other plants are not coming into the bed. Even if the seeds, even if you start to have a few weeds, if you work very low, you can still remove the weed extremely easy. So it's still not a problem because we only have a media into the aquaponic setup. We don't have a soil that is compact. There is no watering because obviously we got a little pump in place. So there is no manual watering to do. The system is working by itself. There is water inside, but you never have to water your plants. The food produced is extremely tasty, and the reason why is that the vegetables have always access to all the nutrients they need. And you got an ecosystem that is in place. Obviously, here we talk about the bacteria, but we got also a quantity of insects and worms that are basically breaking down the organic matters in different nutrients. So there is a very large diversity of nutrients available for the plants, and therefore the food that is produced is extremely tasty and extremely high in terms of vitamins. Aquaponics also bring nature into the city. Can bring nature in the city. If you live in the city and you put an aquaponic setup in place, you're going to start to see a lot of biodiversity coming around. You're going to see some bees coming and eating basically from the aquaponic setup, and a lot of different insects around, birds as well. So it's fantastic. As soon as you put an aquaponic setup in place, you can see a lot of different animals around. So that's fantastic for kids and me, even myself. You know, every week I see a new insect around in Australia. I think it's just magic. So the plants are growing twice as fast as in normal garden. So here I want to be careful at what I say. It's an average, okay? If you grow your food in a garden, what happens is that the plants need to develop some very strong roots to have access to the few nutrients that are into the soil. In aquaponics, the plants have always access to all the nutrients that are present into the aquaponic setup. And if you have a good balance between the quantity of fish and the quantity of bacteria and the quantity of vegetables you have in the setup, the vegetables have no limit in terms of nutrients. The only limit then becomes the quantity of sunlight and the temperature. So if you grow your food if you manage your setup in good conditions, your food is going to grow extremely fast. There is no treatment and no chemicals, so I talked about it already. You never want to use any chemical in an aquaponic setup, simply because even if you treat the vegetables or the fish, the chemicals are going to be into the water and they're going to have a negative impact on the bacteria. You produce the food where it's consumed, so that's very important. So you don't have any transport anymore. So it removes all the negative impact that is linked to the transport and all the generation of pollution. It uses 10 times less water than a classical garden. So I talked about it, there is no watering. The water stays into the system and you just have a bit of evaporation. It can be done in the city in an extremely small space. So even if it's on a 1 square meter, you can grow some food, you can put an aquaponic setup in place. So it's really adapted to everyone. And it uses up to 70% less energy than conventional garden. So in aquaponics and in aquaculture. So you know, in aquaculture we use pumps, we use a lot of different things. In aquaponics we use a very, very small pump. So for all my setups I use a 20-watt pump. So it consumes 3 times less than a light globe, to give you an idea. So here it's very sustainable from an energy consumption point of view. So now, what kind of food can we grow, and especially what kind of fish? So first, when you select the fish, they need to be adapted to the temperature where you live. That's the first criterion. You know, you want a fish that is able to survive to the extreme of temperatures you have. So if you live in a cold country, you want to grow trout or fish that are adapted to very cold water. If you live in a warm country, you can grow tilapia, such as in this picture, or barramundi, whatever the fish are available around your place. So that's the first factor, the temperature of the water. Then here you see a little movie about some fish. It's actually goldfish that are spawning, and you got a silver perch with them. So the question here is, what kind of fish do you want to grow? Do you want to eat the fish, or is it just ornamental? You just want to use them as a generation of nutrient for your vegetable garden? That's the kind of question you must ask yourself. Or you want to do both. You can grow some fish, such as this golden trout, that are ornamental. You know, it's lovely trout, but also it's extremely good to eat. This trout is actually a rainbow trout, but it's selected to develop this special color. So that's what we call the golden trout, but it has the same quality as a rainbow trout. So it's a really fantastic fish to grow in aquaponics. Finally, here's a little movie about the kind of fish that you can grow in a very small setup. So here it's a rainbow trout again, because it's a fish that is fast, it's growing extremely fast. So you see the size of the setup is only not even 1 square meter. It's 90 centimeters square. And I grow a fish that is 1.5 to 2 kilo into this setup. So that's what you can do. And this fish is only not even 2 years old. So you can see that you can grow some fish that are growing extremely fast once you understand how aquaponics work. The other option for the beginners that I would recommend is to use some silver perch. So, or silver perch or other hardy fish that are available wherever you live. So carp are one of them. Some fish that are very hardy and that can survive to whatever mistake you make in your aquaponics setup. You know, as a beginner, you may make some mistakes and it can have a negative impact on the quality of the water. So if you grow some fish that are very hardy, you got a lot of chance that they're going to survive. So when you start your setup, if you start aquaponics, maybe at the beginning prioritize those kind of fish that are very hardy and that can survive to poor water conditions. In terms of vegetables, of plants, at the beginning, obviously we still have the same thing. You want to grow some vegetables that are adapted to the temperature of the environment you are living in. So look at what the farmers around you are doing, look at the gardeners around, what kind of crop are they growing, and try to grow the same thing. It needs to be adapted to the season as well. Then we got the same question. Do you want to grow some ornamental flowers, or you want to grow some edible plants, or a mix of both? So if you look at the picture on the right, you see that's a snow pea that we grow in Australia. And you see the quality of the flowers. They develop this lovely purple. So you can find some plants that are edible, but are still very nice to see and improve the look of your backyard. You want to grow some plants that are easy to grow. So leafy plants, most of the time they grow extremely fast in aquaponics. And if you start your setup, that's the kind of plant you want. So for example, any kind of cabbage, kale, or lettuce, spinach, those kind of things are growing extremely well in aquaponics when you begin. And then when your setup is a bit more established, when you go more organic methods, you can grow some food that is a bit more exciting, such as fruits, tomato, chili, all those kind of things. So I'm going to respond to a few very common questions that I receive very often. So what is the cost of an aquaponics setup? So here, I want to make it very clear, there is no specific budget. You can make a setup from scratch. You can just recycle a few tanks that you get from old factories or even from the side of the road sometimes. You can really recycle some tanks and turn them into aquaponics. So you can start from a budget that is close to zero. And you can also spend thousands and thousands of dollars to have a setup designed with a sustainable material, and that is going to look amazing. That is going to be a real feature in your garden. How many fish can you grow? So the quantity of fish that you can grow is going to be directly dependent of the size of your grow bed and specifically of the quantity of bacteria that you can have on your media. So you know that in aquaponics, we are using this grow bed. In the grow bed, we got specific media. So when I talk about media, it's basically some rocks. And on those rocks, you got some bacteria that are going to be living on. So if you use some rocks that are very efficient, that have some holes, so the bacteria can live also in the holes, you will increase the surface area, and therefore you can grow more fish. So if you have a very efficient media, you can, I had some setup where I went up to 1 kilo of fish per 50 liters of media. So that's the maximum, really, the maximum limit that you must keep in mind. You always want to stay below that. But yeah, that's something possible to go up to 50 liters of media per kilo of fish. Will aquaponics feed humanity? That's an interesting question, and I think that aquaponics is part of the solution if it's linked to permaculture. So basically, you got your aquaponics setup in your garden, and you can sometimes use a bit of water of your aquaponics setup to water your normal garden. In this case, you add some fertilizer in the classic garden, and you use your aquaponics setup as a generator of nitrogen. So I think if we use this technique, we can really grow an amazing quantity of food for everyone. So how should I manage my aquaponics setup during the holiday period? So if you go on holiday, the best thing to do is to basically don't care about your aquaponics setup. So the principle is that, you know, fish in nature, they are used to fast for long periods. And if you feed your fish during the holiday period, if you ask someone to come and to distribute some food, or if you put an automatic feeder on your fish tank, it can be completely fine. But also, if you got a problem, if for some reason the pump stopped working, or if there is no power anymore, and you still feed the fish, the water is not going to be purified, because the water is not going to go into the whole system, and therefore the toxicity of the water is going to increase, because you're going to have this input of fish food that is continually coming into the fish tank, and therefore your fish may die after a while. So it's better not to feed your fish when you are not here. If you can't look after your setup, if you can't see that everything is working, don't feed the fish, and they're going to be fine. They're going to survive for several weeks without any problem. What are the risks involved with aquaponics? So that's a common question. Most of the time, people are asking, we got all those problems in the food industry, where sometimes with the chickens or with the pork, there is a bacteria called Listeria that is living into the intestine of the pork. And then when in the field they use the pork and the chicken poo to fertilize the fields, sometimes you got the Listeria that is growing on the vegetables. And then when humans consume those vegetables, they fall sick and they may even die. So what is very important to understand here is that fish are cold-blooded animals. So it's very different to any warm-blood animal. They can't have any Listeria in their body, and there is no bacteria that can be transmitted from the fish to the human. So it's completely safe to use an aquaponic setup and to grow food from fish poo. There is no disease that can grow from the fish poo. Then, can I use an old tank to create my aquaponic setup? Yes, of course. In aquaponics, the idea is to be as sustainable as possible. So we want to recycle as many components as possible. Now, there are a few things to make sure when you want to recycle a tank, is to make sure that the tanks that you're going to use are food grade. So which means that there have never been any chemicals in contact with those tanks. The other thing you want to make sure as well is that you are not going to have any interaction between the pH of the water and the tank. Just for example, if you use a concrete tank, the concrete is going to increase the pH of your water, which can be a problem in terms of managing the setup later on. So that's the 2 points you need to make sure when you recycle a fish tank, is that you don't have any pH interaction, and it's a food grade tank. I am off the grid. Can I put an aquaponics setup in place? The response is yes, you can. Here in Melbourne Aquaponics, I got one setup that is plugged in a solar panel, and it's working really well as well. But you need to adapt the setup to make sure that you got some fish that can survive if there is not enough sun for a few days. So personally, I use goldfish only for this setup, because goldfish is a fish that can survive even if the water temperature is very low, and even if there is no oxygen into the water, or very low quantity of oxygen. Does it smell? No, aquaponics doesn't smell at all. So the bacteria that are living in aquaponics, they are aerobic bacteria, and they always have access to oxygen, and there is no smell at all. If you can smell something in aquaponics setup, it's because it has been designed inappropriately, and it's not working. The water is going to be toxic for the fish, and there is a big problem. So in all my setup, we don't have any smell. So a few other things that I wanted to develop, but we don't have much time. I wanted to say that obviously you see all those pictures. That's the kind of insects that you can see on you on your setup. So every day you discover a new life around, especially in summer. So that's a fantastic thing. Also, even if you got a very small aquaponic setup, you can produce some juice from your crop. You can harvest the leaves of your vegetables, you can mix them and make a nice juice. And from this juice, you can drink every day the food that was alive a few minutes before. And you are drinking all the vitamins of your vegetables, so you don't lose anything. So please don't put any food in the fridge. That's horrible. The fridge is killing all the vitamins, right? So you harvest the food, you mix it, you drink it. That's just fantastic. Now, obviously, you can cook, you can elaborate your recipes, but if you got a very small aquaponics setup, when I was talking about 1 square meter, with a 1 square meter setup, you can drink every morning your juice from the aquaponics setup. So then you can put your vitamin pills in the rubbish. You can stop buying this, which costs a fortune, and only grow your little aquaponics setup. You drink your juice every morning. It's going to be full of vitamins, and it's going to completely fulfill all your nutritional needs, in terms of vitamins and even omega-3 and all those kind of polyunsaturated fats. Another thing is that aquaponics can be used to make some nice cuttings. So you can see on the picture on the bottom right corner, it's tomato cuttings, but you can do cuttings of everything. So in aquaponics, we are in an environment where we use, we have a constant quantity of nutrient and moisture. So anything that can grow from cuttings, you put it in your aquaponics setup and it's going to grow like crazy. When I arrived in Australia, I didn't have a job at the beginning. I was landscaper, basically. I did a bit of landscaping job around just for a few months. And I used my aquaponics setup to grow some buxus and to sell some hedges to my customers. Because as soon as you put a cutting inside, you got some fantastic roots that are developed. And then you can just plant it in your normal garden. So that's a fantastic tool for that as well. So now the question that a lot of you are wondering is where to start, because that's a lot of information, but how do you really put your system in place? I identified 6 critical steps that for me are the basics of aquaponics and that you really need to understand in order to put a setup together and to grow some sustainable food at home. So the first thing is to understand the aquaponics principles, the one I showed you before, the nitrogen cycle, where basically you go from the fish food, fish poo, to the vegetable nitrogen, vegetable nitrate, the vegetable nutrient. Then you need to understand the aquaponics design. So here you see the setup is composed of a fish tank, a fish pump, a grow bed, and in this grow bed there is a very specific part that is here, which is called the bell siphon. And this little setup here, this little part is going to allow the level of water into the grow bed to go up and down several times per hour. So doing so, the bacteria that are living on the grow bed always have access to the oxygen that is into the water. And that's what they need because they're aerobic bacteria. So step number 3 is to respect some specific ratio and limits. So when you design your setup, you need to understand that you need to have a specific ratio between the grow bed and the fish tank, and you need to respect the fish biomass quantity and the grow bed volume. So there are some specific ratio to really understand and to respect. If you don't respect it, unfortunately, your setup is not going to work. So here, obviously, I'm going very fast, right? You can find all this information on our website in the free trainings of our website. The website is Melbourne Aquaponics. So I'm going to go to step number 4. Step number 4, you need to select a good water pump for your setup. And you need a good water pump, and you can add a little air pump for your fish tank. So a lot of people that I see now that are putting setups together by themselves, they use very big air pump and very big water pump. And the problem of using a very big water pump is that it's working really well for the fish, for the ecosystem, but from a sustainable point of view, it doesn't work at all. The water pump has a big, if it's a big water pump, it's going to have a huge electricity consumption, and therefore it's going to have it's going to be not sustainable, right? The cost of your vegetables is going to be crazy. So you have to use the smallest water pump possible. And one of the good things to keep in mind is to have a water pump that is able to renew the total volume of your grow bed twice per hour. And it's enough to grow food in aquaponics. I know some people who have some water pumps that that are able to renew 100 times the volume of the grow bed per hour, which is for me a big waste. Then you need to select the correct media. So there are different kinds of media that are available for aquaponics. I recommend to use some media that have a very high surface area, but also I recommend to test the media. We want to make sure we don't have any interaction with the pH of the water. So to do so, you can just take a little bowl of water, you put some media inside, and you put some vinegar on top of this media, and you see if there are some reactions. If you see some bubbles, then it means that you can't use this media because it's going to release some. It's going to have some interaction with the pH of your water, and it's going to increase the pH. So that's the 2 points that you need to check when you buy some media. Finally, you need to understand the cycle, how to cycle your system. So it's very linked to the nitrogen cycle that we saw before. So if you want to see that, you go into our website, which is Melbourne Aquaponics, and you're going to find a specific video about it. It's completely free. So yeah, go there and have a look. That's step number 6. So once you understand all those different steps, you can start to design your setup. But there are 2 ways to do it, and there is 1 way to success. So the 2 ways to start aquaponics, the first one is the common way. So the way that we all use as humans is to learn from your mistake. So when you start learning how to walk as a kid, you try walking, you fall, and each time you fall, you understand something. And after maybe thousands or even more try, then you finally succeed and you can walk. And that's a method a lot of people are using for everything in life, and it works amazingly well. The only problem is in aquaponics is if you start by yourself without the good knowledge and you try to learn from your mistake, you have a high risk of using the wrong design for your setups, using unadapted material, and not being able to manage the ecosystem properly. So all those things are going to have a very negative impact on, it's going to waste your time, it's going to waste a lot of money, because if you design it not properly, you have to do it again. So you need to, depending on what you use, it can be very expensive. And the problem is you may lose your fish. And it happens a lot with beginners. When they start by themselves, they often lose the fish. So that's the kind of thing you want to keep in mind in aquaponics. It's not like when we were kids and we were falling and trying again. Here, each time you make a mistake, it can have a very negative impact on your time, on the money involved, and on the life of your fish. So the second way that I call the way to success is to follow the advice of someone who can guide you through the process of aquaponics. So you follow the advice of an expert, and then you're going to have good results because it's going to guide you to do exactly the good thing. You start with a good design and you use adapted materials. In this case, you're going to grow your fish and vegetables in good conditions. You're going to produce healthy food and with great success. So following this point, I want to say that here in Melbourne Aquaponics, we offer a free training in our website. When I talk about free training, it's actually a bunch of videos about some critical points in aquaponics, and you can find a lot of information also on internet. The problem is if you go on internet, you're going to find some information that are not good as well. So you need to make sure that you can trust the people that are giving you the information. We can also offer you 2 other support tools. One of them is our digital aquaponics manual. So this aquaponics manual, I designed this manual. It took me a lot of time, but I think I put all my knowledge and all the interesting things that can be important for anyone who want to set up and manage an aquaponics setup. It covers 45 sections, divided in 45 sections, and it's a bit more than 150 pages. But the good point is that I know that a lot of people don't like to read. So obviously you can read this book. It's the whole book. It's very interesting. I think it is. There is a bit of a philosophical approach as well, instead of sustainability. But the good point is that because I divided in 45 sections, if one day you need to know something very specific, you don't have to read the whole book. You can find it directly, and you just have one page to read to get the information you need. So that's the idea that that's the plan that I used when I designed this manual. So in this manual, obviously, I give you all the critical limits, all the different ratio, all the design tip that you need to grow your food in aquaponics. So if you are interested by this manual that I highly recommend, you can find in the description of this video, on the YouTube the YouTube description of the video, you're going to find a link, and you can have more information about this aquaponics manual. Then I worked on another thing. At the moment, I'm still working on it. It's actually an online aquaponics training, where basically I'm going to help you to go from zero knowledge in aquaponics or in gardening to being able to produce and to maintain an aquaponics setup and to produce healthy food at home. So this training is going to be several hours of video, and you simply have to watch and reproduce what I do in the video. So we're going to do it together. It's composed of 5 modules. It looks like we got a little technical problem as well. I'm going to relaunch that, sorry. No, apparently it's... Sorry, I had a little problem, but I'm just going to put the slide back into the screen. I apologize again. Apparently it doesn't want to. Okay, look, I'm gonna just give you the information like that without the slide. So basically, this training is a training composed of 5 modules divided in 25 lectures. The first module is going to be a zoom on the general aquaponics principles and the management of the ecosystem. The second module is going to be the different limits and ratio of aquaponics. The third module is going to be a zoom on the design of your aquaponics setup. So how to design the setup, we're going to do it together. The fourth module is going to be the cycling process and how to test the water, how to make sure you got the conditions for your ecosystem. And the final module is going to be how to plant and introduce the fish and maintain them in good conditions. So if you are interested by this setup, by this training, it's still currently in design, but it's going to be available in December. And because I'm still working on it, I still have a lot of work to do. It's demanding hours and hours of work to produce this training. But you can pre-order the training now. If you go on the description of this video, you can pre-order it. And if you pre-order it, you got a specific price, an exceptional price. So I really recommend you to have a look into the description of this video and to have a look. You're going to have way more information about this training on the link below. And I think, yeah, thank you very much for watching this webinar. So as a conclusion, I would say that the fact I've shown that the way the society is producing and consuming food is extremely concerning. from a sustainable and healthy point of view, and we all have the possibility to produce sustainable and healthy food in our own backyard. So today I offer you my support in the journey of aquaponics, and it's up to all of us to share the message. So I recommend you to visit the link into the description of this video, and I wish you a great success and happiness producing healthy food at home. Bye-bye.